Welcome to the Commonwealth Policy Center Live. The election is just days away, and one of the most talked about items isn't regarding a candidate, but it's regarding an issue. Amendment 2 is on the ballot. It's an amendment that would make clear that abortion is not a protected right under the Kentucky Constitution. But opponents of the measure say that it's politicians trying to ban all abortions, and they're meddling in a very personal decision for women that should be reserved to a woman and her doctor. Joining us to talk further about Amendment 2 are several Kentucky legislators who voted to put Amendment 2 on the ballot. From the top of my screen to the left is State Representative Mary Beth Imes from Murray. We have State Representative Melinda Prunty from Muhlenberg County. Both are from far west Kentucky. And then Nancy Tate, a State Representative from Meade County. State Representative Savannah Maddox from Grant County. Is that correct, Savannah?
That is correct.
Okay,
Richard.
very good. And then last but not least is State Representative Jennifer Decker from Shelbyville. Ladies, welcome to the Commonwealth Policy Center Live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
You're welcome. Hey, so let's start out with what Amendment 2 says to give us some context. Amendment 2 says this: to protect human life, nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to secure or protect a right to abortion or require the funding of abortion. Representative Tate, I'm going to start off with you. You held a press conference with 27 of your colleagues in the State House and the State Senate. I should note that you are the chairwoman of the pro-life caucus in the state legislature. You had this press conference to address some of the misinformation that was out there. What did you intend to accomplish with that press conference, which was just held recently in the Capitol?
You know, Richard, thank you very much for asking that very important question. You know, one of the things that I was finding very disturbing was the fact that we were being accused of misinformation. We were basically being accused of lying. Whenever we talk about, whenever we promote and encourage or, discuss this constitutional amendment, we're being accused of misholding very valuable information. And I find that very discouraging. I'm not going to say that any of us are perfect, and some of us make mistakes when we communicate information, but there's absolutely no intentional lying or communicating of disinformation. All we really want to do is that we truly, as a body, find it very important for us to protect women and their families. Our whole purpose as a legislative branch is to protect those who are the weak, and then also protect life and to prevent death. So I find it shocking and very disturbing, which is why I call this press conference.
Right, very good. The group opposed to Amendment 2 is called Protect Kentucky Access, and they're running ads across the state saying that this is politicians that are meddling in an issue that should be between a pregnant woman and her doctor. Representative Prunty, I'd like to go to you. How do you respond to something like that?
The amendment has nothing to do with the relationship of a woman with her doctor. When the Supreme Court overturned Roe, they said there was not a right in the U.S. Constitution. This amendment would simply say there's not a right in the Kentucky Constitution, and then nor the taxpayer funding of it, because the Hyde Amendment is being challenged at the federal level. So they're mixing up health care with rights in the Constitution. And they're trying to say that this has to do with medical care when it does not.
Yeah, very good. State Representative Savannah Maddox, the Protect Kentucky Access group is also saying this, that Amendment 2 will force women to give birth to stillborn children and to prevent treatment of ectopic pregnancies. Now, you're a mom, you've got 2 children. How do you address this as a mother, as a state legislator as well, who voted for Amendment 2?
Richard, never before have I seen the volume of misinformation and frankly lies that are being spread on behalf of opponents of Amendment 2. And I think that it's important to note that, no aspect of this amendment would interfere with the ability of a woman to address a medical emergency. And the fact that groups are acting like it would or spreading that misinformation is just so disingenuous. But really more so, I think it's important to note that of the millions of dollars that are being spent currently and have been spent trying to defeat this amendment, over $1 million of that has come directly from Planned Parenthood. And I believe that it is their intention to try to keep up their business model that frankly preys upon vulnerable women.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. According to research we did back as of October the 12th, Planned Parenthood and the ACLU combined 45% of the total funding for Protect Kentucky Access. It was about $1.4 million between both groups that they raised to defeat this measure. And I'm going to go to Representative Decker. What are your thoughts on an outside group getting involved? Protect Kentucky Access is led by the person from Kansas, Rachel Sweet, who helped to defeat the Kansas amendment. She came to Louisville to lead this effort. It's funded by outside money, and they're spending their money to confuse and misrepresent Kentuckians. What are your thoughts, if you have any, on outside groups getting involved to a high degree? By the way, for the record, as of October the 12th, Protect Kentucky Access raised 83% of the money came from outside the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Your thoughts?
Actually, I think it is sad that Kentuckians are being preyed upon with misinformation by outsiders, but I mean, that is true in politics in general. Money comes from outside of the state for all kinds of initiatives and for candidates. But what makes me the saddest is the dishonesty here and actually preying on people who really, the issues are so convoluted. What they are saying is that, in essence, if this passes, it is a ban on abortion in a state. And that is not something that would be in the Constitution in general. I mean, constitutions are set forth to put governments together and then to restrain government. So what we're doing here is saying nothing here gives that right. That simply states what the Constitution says, which is obvious. Our Constitution is so clear on this. It says there is an inalienable right to life. Unlike the federal Constitution, that's not in there. There's a 14th Amendment that protects and prevents the taking of life without due process. But our Constitution is so clear. And all this is just a restatement of the truth. I mean, that was found by a court before our Constitution was written and after our Constitution was written. So,
Becker, let me press into that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but let me press into that a little bit. If it's obvious that that abortion is not a protected right under the Kentucky Constitution, why is this amendment necessary?
Well, because the courts, if we don't answer that question, the courts will, and we have seen the proclivity of courts to find rights that don't exist. So, I like to tell people that if this fails, or if it passes, abortion is going to be regulated by the legislature, similar to the fact that driving a car is not a right found in our Constitution. And yet we drive our cars because the legislature allows that at a certain age, at a certain speed limit, etc. So all this is saying is that you don't have that right in the Constitution, but the legislature will decide it if there's no right and can allow it given the right legislature. So this movement by outsiders or insiders is particularly offensive when people come into our state to spread falsehoods. But the falsehoods in general are so misleading and confusing that they just are abhorrent.
Very good. State Representative Imes in far west Kentucky. How's the weather out there, by the way? You're 4 hours from Frankfurt, aren't you?
I am. It is beautiful today. We had some rain yesterday, which was much needed. So we're thankful. Yes.
Good. So Representative Imes, you are a mother, you're a grandmother. What do you say to somebody? Let me take a step back. First of all, this is made to be a referendum on abortion, when in fact, it's really keeping judges in their lane. And as Representative Decker just said, it's to keep judges from finding a right in the state constitution to abortion.
Right.
But this has been turned into a referendum on abortion rights, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
So my question to you is this: what do you say to somebody, since that's where the discussion is, we should address some of these questions. What do you say to somebody who says that abortion is a choice between a woman and her doctor?
You know, Kenny and I had this conversation with a couple this morning. But it is a constitutional right, Richard. That is where I think we have to come from. Everybody has, they keep talking about choices. I think the thing, you were talking about the money that was being spent by this group. Less than half a mile from my house, there's a huge billboard that says, who do you want in charge of your health care? Politicians or yourself? Vote no. And that is a falsehood in itself. It is not a health care problem. It is a moral problem, I guess you would say.
Representative Imes, would you say that we'd be having this conversation if we were talking about the unborn child that we can see and touch and feel? Or is it because you're talking about the child that's in the womb, and therefore it's perceived that women, pregnant women, and they're in a special place, let's be honest, they're carrying another child and they have a great obligation. But would the conversation be different if people could see that child and hold that child? Would they think differently that this is not a choice, but it is actually a human life?
Most definitely, and I think that's why that the language is being used, that is being used. They don't call it a child or a baby. They call it a fetus, or they call it a choice. And I think that is a misnomer. We have to call it what it is. It is a human being.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. State Representative Prunty, there are some arguing that the provision preventing the taxpayer funding of abortion is not necessary. And that's part of what Amendment 2 will do. It prevents taxpayer funded abortions. Some are saying, well, it's not happening, therefore, this amendment is not necessary. How do you respond to that?
I respond to that the Hyde Amendment at the federal level has been challenged and could be in danger. And so we want to make sure that doesn't happen here in Kentucky, that if the Hyde Amendment gets overturned at the federal level in Washington, D.C., that we have tax dollars protected here in Kentucky, that they won't be used for that, won't be spent for an abortion.
Okay, very good. State Representative Savannah Maddox, we've heard about difficult pregnancies, those pregnancies that have been conceived in assault, heartbreaking situations. They're very rare. Less than 1% of abortions are done due to rape, incest, or to save the mother's life. But there are ads being run saying that essentially that politicians want to force women to, for them to, who are victims of rape or incest, to carry those babies to term. And I know that this amendment doesn't address that, but how would you respond?
Well, first of all, I would respond with the fact that this amendment does not address that at all. And again, as Representative Decker alluded to, this is something that the legislature will in perpetuity continue to be able to decide. But that said, as far as those exceptions, ending the life of an unborn child is never the answer for any type of tragedy or trauma that occurs in someone's life. And I think that it's also important to note that if there were any physiological or anatomical harm that were to result in the form of a medical emergency that would occur from a pregnancy, we've already covered that topic. And I want to touch on something that you asked just a moment ago, really briefly, the fact that, why is this necessary about taxpayer funding? Never again do I think that we have the luxury of saying that we shouldn't do something because we're currently not funding something with taxpayer dollars, because we're already beginning to see at the federal level that taxpayer dollars are being used with federal employees to give them the opportunity to go to states where abortion is legal. So I absolutely think it's necessary, and we need to do everything that we can to get Amendment 2 passed.
Yeah. Representative Maddox, what are you hearing from constituents in your district? Are they confused over this amendment? Do they understand what this amendment is? What are you hearing?
I represent a very conservative district, so I feel as though my constituents are very supportive of the amendment. I've seen a lot of signage in favor of it. I have not run into a lot of misconceptions here in the 61st, but outside of it, there has been quite a few issues with misinformation being delivered, particularly to women, because I believe that they're being targeted by these outside groups. And, I encourage everyone to inform themselves and do what they can to combat those lies, because it is imperative that we pass this amendment.
Very good. There's an article in the Louisville Courier-Journal on Wednesday, and it said this: Kentucky GOP poised to expand supermajority, but Democratic hopes hinge on one factor. So what's that one factor? According to Democratic strategists, it is abortion rights. Planned Parenthood has spent $50 million nationwide to elect pro-abortion candidates and to defeat pro-life candidates. I'm going to go to Representative Tate. How do you respond to that? We're talking about Democratic consultants saying to their candidates, hey, if you want to win, make abortion rights a priority issue. And we just lost Representative Tate. So while she tries to get back on, I'm going to pitch that to Jennifer Decker. Representative Decker, can you respond to that?
Yeah,
What do you think
actually,
about a party that is making abortion rights a priority to help their candidates get elected?
I think that our legislature is full, a super majority of very conservative legislators for one reason. We were elected by people who knew our priorities. They wanted us to be pro-life. So I believe I think that the other side is way off base, thinking that this confusion means that people want abortion rights. I think what's happened is that voters have become confused by the misinformation saying this will stop those two exceptions, rape and incest. So I have talked with very conservative voters who would not want our Constitution to provide that right, but they're not being asked about that. They're being asked, they think they're being asked whether we should stop all abortions, and they're being told that if this passes, rape and incest, and that it will never be in Kentucky. Savannah's right. Given the right legislature, all of those rules can change. So that is misinformation. I don't think voters would want us to become abortion rights states, but I do think they are worried about those two exceptions. And in other states where similar laws where this has been an issue, you have seen legislatures go back, and I've heard people talking about offering such amendments. So it's just a falsehood. And I don't think it's going to work in the long term, because I don't think people in Kentucky want expansive abortion rights.
Very good. So Representative Tate is back with us. Representative Tate, as I was sharing that article from the Louisville Courier-Journal, some Democratic consultants are saying that abortion rights should be a priority issue for Democratic candidates, not just across the country, but in the Commonwealth of Kentucky as well. What would be your response to that? Is abortion rights an important issue across the Commonwealth of Kentucky?
Well, I'm going to say, Richard, I think that it is. There's a couple of responses to that. Since 1910, Kentucky has demonstrated that we're a pro-life state. That was the very first time that there was a legislation that was passed in the Commonwealth that said we want the women to be protected. And I also want to point out that, they act like that it's a Republican versus a Democrat issue. But, I want to point out that this amendment was passed in the Kentucky House on February 25th of 2021 by a margin of 76 to 20. It was passed in the Senate by a margin of 32-6. This was a bipartisan effort that was passed by both Democrats and Republicans, and that was voted for in the House and in the Senate. You know, I also want to point out that some people say, well, you know, as Republicans, since we have the majority in the House and the Senate, that we're just taking advantage of this opportunity that's been presented to us. And I'd like to point out exactly kind of the opposite, is that this opportunity was given to us by the voters, you know, and we've even in the past, we had Democrats that were claiming that, and claiming that they were pro-life. Obviously, if they were voting for this constitutional amendment, they were demonstrating that they were pro-life. So it's not necessarily something that we were taking advantage of. It's an opportunity that has been given to us here at the state level. We've been asking for this opportunity to be given to us from the U.S. Supreme Court, and we were given that on June 24th. And now we have to step up to the plate as pro-life Kentuckians and demonstrate that we are pro-life and that we want to protect the life of the mother and the baby in the womb.
Representative Tate, since 2016, the state legislature has passed 13 different pro-life bills. Your bill, House Bill 3 this last session, the omnibus pro-life bill, passed by a wide margin. I think it was bipartisan, passed with bipartisan support. If the Amendment 2 does not pass, are these 13 laws, including the omnibus pro-life bill, are they in jeopardy of being struck down by a court?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think basically we've already kind of started seeing that. Practically speaking, this would keep state judges in their lane from interpreting the law and not inventing new laws and new rights that the Constitution does not speak of. You know, we want to make sure that we have a separation of power between the three branches of government. Our role as lawmakers is to listen to our constituents and to respond to their concerns and to craft laws accordingly. We're accountable to them. We are absolutely, each one of us are on the ballot. All the ladies in this, you know, in this space right here, we're all on the ballot every 2 years. And judges, on the other hand, are generally insulated from the voters and from public opinion. So a yes vote on constitutional amendment number 2 protects Kentucky voters' self-determination to create their own laws and not judges. We do not want justices legislating from the bench.
Very good. We're winding down here. We've got just a few minutes till we end. Representative Prunty, what would you say to the woman who has heard a lot of the ads from Protect Access Kentucky, scaring them that it would do any number of things? What would you say to the woman who is wavering on this issue and maybe doesn't fully understand what Amendment 2 would do?
Well, I had a woman in my district who is a historian, and I shared with her what Representative Tate just shared about the fact that life of the mother was passed in 1910, reaffirmed in the 20s, the 40s, the 70s. I explained to them that the trigger bill was put into place that if Roe was ever overturned, that Kentucky would revert back to what it was pre-Roe, and we were the life of the mother. And that if they don't want, and ask the question, who do you want making your laws? Do you want judges legislating from the bench, or do you want your duly elected officials making those policies? And that's basically what this boils down to. And I had to explain all that, the history of it, because they thought it was about banning abortions or having access to abortions. They didn't understand. But when I gave them the history of it and told them if the people want access to abortions expanded, then they need to put that pressure or communicate that to their duly elected officials, which the Supreme Court said turn this back to, in order to do that. And once I got through all of that, they were like, okay, then I do need to be yes on this, because they were buying into the misinformation. And I would like to just say, I mean, and I don't think this is ever talked about, but their misinformation about ectopic pregnancies, they are actually making the case to support the bill that we passed for an in-person exam before a woman takes chemical abortion pills, because if she has an ectopic pregnancy and takes those pills and hasn't had an exam, she could bleed out and die at home. And so to me, they don't understand that they're actually making the case against chemical abortions. And it always bothers me that they never talk about the baby, and they never talk about adoption. And as a Mimi of 3 adopted grandkids, adoption is a beautiful thing. And I feel like they just need to look at the whole picture. But talking about this amendment, they need to look at the real reason for the amendment. It's not about banning abortions and denying complete access. It's about who's making your laws, who's making your policies, and not letting judges legislate from the bench. And when I say that, when I finally get through all of that, they seem to get it.
Very good. Mary Beth Imes, what do you see and what are you hearing from your constituents in Callaway and Trigg counties? Do they understand this issue, what Amendment 2 actually does and what it doesn't do?
I will have to admit, there's been some confusion about the law, because I've had several people say, do I vote yes on this or do I vote no? And I said, definitely yes. And I try, like Melinda said, I try to explain to them what the bill actually does, what the amendment actually does. It seems pretty positive, Richard. I think here in Callaway County, we're predominantly conservative county, so praying that it will pass.
Okay, very good. State Representative Savannah Maddox, you've already weighed in on this. You said that the 61st is a conservative district. Do you, and of course you're running for governor, so you've been traveling the state. Do you have maybe a statewide perspective as to what are you hearing from the voters? Do you think Kentucky will vote for Amendment 2 on Tuesday, November the 8th?
I think, Richard, as with all things, it's in God's hands. I continue to pray that Amendment 2 will pass because there is somewhat of an information gap as I travel across the Commonwealth, and some people aren't familiar with the extent that that we would like for them to be. A lot of money is being spent to defeat this amendment as well. And I just want to thank you. And I want to thank the ladies that have joined us this evening that have the courage to stand up and speak out, because even on the right, there are some folks that have not spoken out as much on this amendment as we would hope for. And the adversaries on the left have been very difficult to overcome as well. So I just think that we need to press forward, stay on message, stick to the truth, and do the best that we can to get the truth to our constituents.
Very good. State Representative Jennifer Decker, Shelbyville is actually not very far from where I am. You're almost a neighbor. Your farm is maybe 10, 15 minutes away from my farm. So
God's
what are
country.
God's kind of beautiful country here. What are you hearing from your constituents in Shelby County, and what do you project them to vote on Amendment 2 on Election Day?
I think Amendment 2 will pass in Shelby County, but I have heard concerns, even from very conservative voters, about the two exceptions being banned if this, and of course they're talking about the trigger law, which would only provide that one offering. But I think there's concern. I think overall, when the bill is explained to them or when the amendment is explained, I think they will vote yes. But I do think there's confusion. And this amendment and the whole process, the legislation from the bench, et cetera, that's the threat here, does raise the whole level of importance of the judicial races that we are having now, the races for the Supreme Court. I think we have got to pay attention to those and elect more conservative judges so that we don't have such a threat of legislation on the left from judges on the bench.
Of course, if I could add to that, you're referring to two hotly contested state Supreme Court races. The 6th district in Northern Kentucky, Joe Fisher is running against Michelle Keller. And then the 2nd district, that is current Justice John Minton's seat. Sean Marie Alcott is running against Kelly Thompson, and that seat is up for grabs. And then there's another important court race on the ballot, and this is the Franklin Circuit Court race where Philip Shepard is up for re-election. Joe Bilby is running against him. Very contested race there as well.
There are Court of Appeals races as well. There's Bob Winters, conservative Republican, running in a race for the 6th Circuit Court of Appeal. I'm sorry, the State Court of Appeals.
That's right. Very good. State Representative Nancy Tate, you will have the last word. What are you hearing from your constituents, and what do you see happening if you're able to make a prediction on this Amendment 2 vote on Tuesday?
Thank you very much. You know, the thing is that I want to point out that this exact same constitutional amendment has already been passed in 2 states. And so it's very important, you know, in Louisiana and Tennessee. So it's very important for Kentuckians to come out and to actually show up and vote on November 8th. You know, again, I want to point out that this is an opportunity that we've been, I'm going to say, begging for 49 years. I've been in this fight for 30 years. And we've been waiting and asking the Supreme Court to give us this opportunity for the rights to be given back to the states. And, you know, there's really never been a significant, I hesitate to use that word, but in every war, there's been a battle that was fought by Kentuckians, that was won by Kentuckians. And I call this a spiritual battle. It's a, you know, it's a battle for the life of the mother and specifically the life of the baby. And so it's very important for Kentuckians to come out and to demonstrate to the rest of the nation that we are a pro-life state and that we will protect both the mother and the baby. I can't tell you there's not a single healthcare measure that I can point out to you where at least 50% of the patients die. And in this case, the patient in an abortion, there's at least 50% of the patient that die every time. And so they call it health care. I call it death care. And so it's very, very crucially important for Kentuckians to stand up for life.
Very good. State Representative Tate, thank you so much. Ladies, thank you all for joining me on CPC Live. God bless you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Richard.
Richard.
Thank you, Richard.